He's the newly crowned BMF champion of the world, but Max Holloway's been turning in insane performances for years now. And a good place to start would be his coming-of-age showdown with Cub Swanson, a fight that forced many MMA analysts to accept that this young featherweight was far better than most had realized. He beat the brakes off of the experienced veteran Swanson on the feet, showing the type of dynamism and volume that we've come to expect from him. In the third round, this $50K bonus-winning performance was capped off by a late submission by way of guillotine. A rare sub for Max, but proof that his game was undeniably well-rounded. This was the win that made Holloway an elite fighter at featherweight. The first major sign of Max Holloway's budding status as a true BMF of the MMA game came during a dominant performance he had against the veteran Ricardo Lamas. This was yet another coming-of-age showcase for Blessed, further proof that he was more than capable of a step-up in competition. But after nearly 3 full rounds of proving his superiority, Holloway was not yet satisfied. Despite being up on the cards and within touching distance of a step up the featherweight ladder, Holloway looked Lamas in the eyes and called on him to throw down in the center of the octagon, effectively giving his opponent one last chance to try and win a fight that he was bound to lose. But even with that being the case, Max was still the one pushing the pace, ending the fight with a huge combo that sent the audience into hysterics. This was the fight that made a lot of MMA fan supporters of the Blessed express. To truly progress into that next level in a division, you're going to come across a legend or two on your ascent. And for Max, taking on the seemingly reinvented former lightweight champ Anthony Pettis for the interim featherweight title was a solid test of Holloway's abilities. But as you might expect, Max was too good for this aging veteran. His volume proved to be too much for Pettis. Once the fight got into its third round, Holloway was in cruise control, eventually putting Showtime down with a mix of bodywork and the versatility we've come to expect from his striking output. A new interim champ was crowned, and the undisputed title shot would soon follow. We all know exactly how good Jose Aldo was, and how much he still had to offer in this sport after losing his belt. The dude moved down to 135 pounds, arguably an even better division than featherweight, and was a legit top 5 talent. But in there with Max Holloway, Aldo was coming up against a new brand of technology that he just couldn't handle. Holloway's volume was way too much for this Brazilian legend on fight night, and when Max finally broke him, it seemed like every MMA fan in attendance was thinking that this was the end of the road for Jose. It wasn't, of course, but that in itself makes what Holloway was able to do that bit more impressive. A new champion was crowned within the featherweight division, and little did we know just how important a fighter he would be for the division's legacy. To Aldo's credit, despite getting thoroughly beat down in their first fight, he showed absolutely no hesitation in signing for a rematch Holloway on short notice. But this time, Max would arguably have an even easier time beating this legend of the sport. In the third round, Holloway's volume was growing far too difficult for Jose to deal with, and when the TKO finally came, it felt like a show of mercy from the referee. Holloway had officially stopped the featherweight GOAT twice, becoming a defending champion in the process. But if you're looking for the most impressive defense of Max Holloway's title reign, the one that truly showed us just how far he could take that wild style of striking pressure and volume, look no further than his destructive effort against Brian Ortega, a tour de force in stand-up wizardry that made his superiority over his peers that much better. Not only did Holloway possess a seemingly infinite gas tank, but his ability to take damage on the chin with little to no visible signs of wear and tear made him a nightmare to fight. And for a guy like Brian Ortega, who was incredibly tough in his own right, he basically served as a punching bag for Holloway over 4 rounds until the doctors stopped the contest. Despite not getting the full 25 minutes to work with, Holloway still managed to break a host of recordings for striking output. Records that would stand the test of time up until he himself would smash through his own high mark years later. The trilogy with Alexander Volkanovski did not go especially well for Max. In their first fight, he was as caught off guard as the rest of us by Volk's technical excellence, losing in an uncharacteristically muted display. But in fight number 2, he did manage to drop the former pound-for-pound number 1 twice, even though he went on to lose the following 3 rounds. And the less we say about the trilogy fight, the better. Max would move on from his rivalry with Volkanovski quite well, but we gotta admit, Volk simply had his number. There might not be a better performance in UFC history over 5 rounds than the one turned in by Max Holloway against Calvin Kattar. As soon as this bout kicked off, you could just tell that Max was in the mood to show off. And through this insane 25-minute affair, he used every single weapon in his arsenal to beat Qatar down, breaking pretty much all of the UFC striking output records, shattering them in fact, as he tested Qatar's chin in a way that almost got kind of hard to watch towards the end. But the fight's definitive moment came in that 5th round, when Holloway, in a moment of total artistry, stopped focusing on his opponent's offense, turning to the commentary desk to tell them that he was the greatest boxer in the UFC, all while dodging punches from Calvin that he wasn't even looking at. Not only was this one of the greatest moments of Max's career, but it was one of the most badass things you'll ever see inside that cage. Any claims of Max not being a hard hitter were about to be addressed pretty firmly in this most recent run. Firstly, it was the aging legend Chan Sung Jung who was tasked with trying to pull off a monumental upset. Jung was truly on his last legs as a pro, and this fight was always going to be a mismatch. But when Holloway countered the Korean Zombie's aggression with a huge one-hitter quitter knockout punch, it was the type of finish that we honestly had not seen from Holloway before. This KO sent the iconic Chan Sung Jung into retirement, but little did we know just how much it would foreshadow what was to come from Blessed. And finally, we come to this absolutely scorching final second knockout from the recent UFC 300 BMF title fight. Max came into this fight as the underdog, of course, and most people expected that Gaethje would outgun in any firefight they might find themselves in. And yet, when push came to shove, Holloway's ability to hurt the highlight was truly shocking, just as his ability to absorb damage at 155 pounds continued to be truly legendary. The entire performance from Holloway was amazing, and by the time the final 10 seconds came, everyone in that arena knew that Max was on his way to a dominant victory on the scorecards. But Holloway decided that it wasn't enough, and proceeded to call on Gaethje to throw down, giving the hardest puncher in the 155-pound division one more chance to take him out, and we all know what happened next. Somehow, someway, Max was the one to get the KO. Probably the most BMF-worthy moment in UFC history.